Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday, February 24th, 2025. Time to get going again, and I'm not ready. I don't know. I got caught up in reading some things, not even the news stuff. I don't know. Sometimes you get drawn into weird things in Wikipedia. Does Wikipedia? I don't think Wikipedia has any sort of, there's no recommendation algorithm. It doesn't tell you what to read next or anything like that. But I get sucked in nonetheless. And I want to learn things, and that's one of the problems with doing a show like this. Too many things happen, and then you have to learn about them all. Luckily, we have Greg Dworkin, who spent some time rounding up and sorting through the things that we ought to be learning anyway. How wild would I say the weekend was? Well, I guess I can't tell. And I guess that's really the signals. I can't tell the difference news-wise between weekend and weekday, which I guess still means we're swimming in chaos, as are most federal workers. I guess that was the chaos of the weekend. Was everybody got emailed by Elon Musk, who has stolen the email addresses of every federal employee. That was the purpose of, I think, the first dodgy raid on the OPM offices to steal all of the email addresses of everybody working for the federal government. And he emailed everybody, and in, I guess, say, management trainee, first 6-month trial balloon thing that, somebody maybe out of a newly minted MBA might do as assistant manager somewhere, mailed the entire federal workforce. And I mean everybody, but it was a little scattershot too. Like stuff that wouldn't necessarily ordinarily fall under OPM, but yes, government employee, like judges, etc. Members of the armed forces got these things. An email that basically said, justify your existence. I want everybody email your supervisor, copy your supervisor, and email me. And I don't know whether I got to go back and read the email, but it sounded like he was saying, I want you to send me and your manager and the president who employs you, unitary executive, a list of 5 things that you got accomplished last week. Well, tell us what you did last week, sort of justify your existence kind of a thing, which, I don't know, you send it to a federal judge. I sat as a federal judge. I heard a trial. We took some evidence. I mean, we did things. Anyway, it was a very awkward and weird kind of a thing. And now, to make it that much worse, he included in the letter, of course, if you don't answer, your non-answer will be interpreted as your resignation from your job with the federal government, which is not, none of this is a thing that you can do, obviously. But then other people will come into the office. That's another thing. A lot of people won't see these things until today, even though they probably read about them over the weekend. And others will come into the office to find a allegedly superseding email from the head of the agency for which they actually work. One, reminding them that the only directives that they are to follow are people in the chain of command in their agency. And that 2, the agency will determine how they will report to OPM about everyone's performance, not each individual employee, and that you are to, in some cases, they said, ignore the email, and others refrain from answering the email. It's a slightly more polite or accommodational approach, perhaps. And it's fairly widespread, but it's not everybody. And then some agencies, I guess, the real losers, got notes that said, no, you are supposed to do this. Go ahead and answer, or go ahead and answer to your supervisor, and the supervisor should collate them and make a report. Anyway, it's going to be largely a disaster. No one's ever going to read this thing. Certainly, this president doesn't even read his presidential daily briefings. I don't know what makes anybody think he would want to know what did the person from the Department of Agriculture in Omaha do last week. But lots of speculation about why this even happened and just what does it tell us about Elon Musk, which is also very interesting, and people pointing out he's one of those guys. He's very egocentric. He thinks he's one of the few people on the planet that actually works hard, and everybody else is a moocher, mooching off of him or something like that. He just basically has no idea how the world works, and he continues to make a show of it in every possible way. Other things happening over the weekend, well, there was lots. We filled you in as we were leaving on Friday, something that has now become a national phenomenon. Wherever Republicans are appearing or are foolish enough, and I don't know how much longer this is going to last, to hold town hall meetings at home. This is what members of Congress do when they're home for the weekend or during recess weeks. They try to do these things. And almost universally where they're going, they're being at least roundly jeered and lightly roasted, if not, overwhelmingly booed and not attacked, not physically anyway, but they're finding it very difficult. And even Republican crowds are giving them a hard time because lots of Republicans are saying, hey, I've been a federal employee for 20 years and you're firing us. And they really expected to be getting wild cheers. They were told by their advisors, their side of the aisle told them, this is a terrific thing. You're saving the country. Everyone's going to appreciate it. And no one did. And it so far has made them quite sad. And it's been very interesting to see the people fired reacting to this. A lot of times, it's a predictable reaction. You get fired, you're a little upset about it. But it actually sounds like the federal employees who have, particularly Republican ones who've lost their jobs, are kind of taking the approach of, I'm not so upset for myself. I suppose I'll find another job eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later. But I'm more angry that you fired me thinking that I had never done anything for anybody, that I was a waste of time. And I know what my federal agency does, and you don't. And it's important, and you don't think so. And that's what makes me mad. I'm mad for the people who kept their jobs. They're going to be upset, too. So a bit of a wild weekend, and Greg Dworkin was here for all of it. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
I'm fine. I was here for most of it, yeah.
Yeah, well, where'd you go for the rest of it?
I just checked out.
Planet Mars, right? You were preparing the way for Elon Musk.
No, it's fine to play Lords of the Fallen for a while.
That's okay. Is that not on this planet?
So what's so interesting is, and I don't have them all lined up here, but I was reading the various responses from the department heads.
Yeah.
Kash Patel told the FBI people, just ignore it, stupid.
Yeah.
And State was much more diplomatic. Your response will be, I 100% did what my supervisor told me to. I 100% did what my job was. I 100% complied with all the regulations in my department. It was really well done. And I read this and said, Sir Humphrey Appleby from Yes Minister must be directing the response from the bureaucracy, because this is a perfect bureaucratic response.
Yeah.
I did everything you told me without doing anything you told me.
Yep. It was a silly idea to begin with, and yeah, so the responses have been interesting, and you can tell the government pros from the non-pros in terms of which department said, no, you should tell them 5 things.
It's all voluntary. And who is Elon Musk to tell anybody anything?
Yeah, that's
and
true.
And then he wrote, we're
regulation.
going to evaluate the responses. He even wrote, this is all on Twitter, a large number of good responses have been received already. Those are the people who should be considered for promotion. And Kyle Cheney points out, the controversy isn't over whether employees should be required to tell their manager what they're doing. I've been through this in the corporate world of hospitals, where there was a time when the people who worked for me were told by their superiors, skipping me, that they had to wand. That is to say, you spend a day with a magic wand that records what you do.
I see.
So this is what I did this hour. This is what I did this hour. This is what I did this hour. And you do it for 24 hours, and that's evaluated by a team of outside consultants who are paid to decide whether or not you're worth your job.
So what is it exactly you would say you do here?
Yeah,
okay.
Well, I saved this life. I saved that life. I started an IV. I assisted with,
Seems nice.
CPR. I did this. Oh, well, couldn't you do it more efficiently? Couldn't you have started an IV while you were doing CPR?
Right.
Well, I did.
How many times? How many chest compressions? And how long did that take you? Okay. Got it.
So, there's people who do that.
But that guy
But
died.
Kyle Cheney points out the controversy isn't over whether employees should be required to tell a manager what they're doing. It's that this email is not coming from the managers. It's being judged on totally unclear criteria by what? Who? AI? Who decides what a good response is for a particular job? And it has been set against a forced resignation threat for noncompliance, which is on X, but not an actual email from the government. Because everything that Musk does to communicate is on X. It's all stupid, and that's why the heads of the department are telling him, screw it. Meanwhile, Trump goes to, I guess, CPAC or some other place and says, I like what Trump's doing. He should be more aggressive. And everybody else who works for Trump is saying, no, not in my department.
Yeah.
And it's more of the leopard face-eating stuff. Now it's starting to hit the department heads. I didn't expect him to fire my people.
Right.
My people report to me. I expected him to fire those people at USAID and other places I don't like. Not my place.
That's true, too. There's a lot of that dynamic. I forgot to mention, also among the fired over the weekend, the whole Pentagon.
Right.
We'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's an enormous story. And, of course, the reason that the Joint Chiefs of Staff head was fired is because he's black, and the naval officer who leads the Navy, who sails the seas, was fired because she's a woman.
Yes,
and
40 years.
They were pretty blunt about it. We need mediocre white people in these jobs.
Yes, I understand. Not only the Army Chief of Staff dismissed here, and chairman of the Joint Chiefs, 40-year career, 4-star general. That the guy they're thinking of using to replace him is 3 stars, which they've never done before, and retired and never had the kind of any of the kind of commands that you normally need.
Yeah, but he's
for
a loyalist.
Yeah. Right,
so
and he has a nickname.
I have a
flashy
friend
nickname.
who is, basically a moderate, doesn't really do politics all that much, just sort of pays attention intermittently, likes following Army Rangers and, workouts that they do and stuff like that. I mean, just your basic person. Your basic male.
That word now carries some extra meaning when you say that about people. But okay, I see what you mean. As a adult over 50 saying a basic kind of normal person is
watches
different.
Football, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the kids say basic.
And
that's bad.
Years ago, when Obama was president,
he
said to me, "I don't understand why the reaction on the Facebook things I follow about, Army Ranger workouts and this and that and everything else, why is it so virulently anti-Obama? I don't get it. I mean, it's okay one way or the other."
Yeah.
And I said, "Because he's black." And this white dude says to me, "No, come on." What?
Yeah.
Okay, wait, flash forward.
It's nice people are unaware of this.
25.
Yeah.
And the C.Q. Brown, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is fired because he's black. And this dude contacts me and says, "Remember when you said Obama was black?" And I said, "Nah." Oh, my God. You were right.
Wow. Well, it must be nice to, have such a nice neutral opinion of everybody for so long. But I see
he doesn't have a neutral opinion of everybody anymore.
No longer. Okay, well, that's
now it's like, what
good.
the heck is wrong with these people?
Yeah.
What the heck is wrong with the New York Times? What the heck is wrong with it? Did you see what they wrote? They wrote, "Fair or not, Zelensky is angering Trump. Is his style hurting Ukraine?" What the hell is wrong? And he just went ballistic on them.
Oh,
and I was laughing. I said, "Well, I brought you around little by little."
Yeah, well, good. Luckily, you can tell me that there's a couple million people feel like the same way as you. You're
that's
in
the
good
thing.
company.
So this is Heather Cox Richardson, Letters from an American.
Yes.
I have it included in today's Pundit Roundup, which is called "The Blowback is Continuing to be Felt," as you were pointing out in the intro to this segment.
Yeah, that's blowback. That was my sound effect for blowback. That's wind, really, but okay.
So Heather Cox Richardson, writing on February 23rd, 2025. The title for her letters is the date she writes them.
Yes.
So that makes it easy to come up with a title.
Right. One step removed.
I struggle sometimes, but, she has it easy.
Yeah.
Something is shifting. Scholar
It is.
of authoritarianism, Timothy Snyder, posted on Blue Sky yesterday. They're still breaking things. They're still stealing things, and they will keep trying to break and steal. But the propaganda magic around the oligarchical coup is fading. Nervous Musk, nervous Trump, nervous Vance have all been outclassed in public arguments these last few days. In fact, the New York Times highlighted my Senator Chris Murphy, who's doing a bang-up job. Government failure, stock market crash, dictatorial alliances are not popular. I would also point out planes falling out of the sky. Which
Yes.
do. People are starting to realize that there's no truth here beyond the desire for personal wealth and power. Rather than backing down, she writes, on their unpopular programs, Trump and the MAGA Republicans are intensifying their behavior, including the blanket pardons of people who were involved in January 6th and then adding to a couple of them. So Enrique Tarrio was following around some of the Capitol Police, heckling
Proud
them.
Boys do. Right. Michael Fanone was
Kyle Cheney of Politico
going somewhere.
reported that the group followed the route they took around the Capitol on January 6th, then posed for photos chanting, as they had that day, whose house, our house. Protesters heckled the group, and one of them put her phone near Tarrio's face. He battered her arm away, and the Capitol Police promptly arrested him for assault.
Well,
I mean, that's how you do
That's his
resistance,
weekend.
little by little.
Yeah. Right. The pushback has been great, and both for elected members and for, I don't know, street activists as well.
Right.
I guess.
Now, remember, Heather Cox Richardson is a historian, so she sees it in historical terms. Then users pointed out the new government employee email system that Doge set up explicitly says using it is voluntary.
Yeah, but they
and
are
therefore,
liars.
resignations of federal employees must be voluntary, says so on their own website. Musk responded by sending out a poll on X asking whether X users think federal employees should be required to send a short email with basic bullet points. The entire exercise made it look as if the lug nuts that were on the wheels of the Musk-Trump government are dangerously loose.
Yes.
Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo commented, "This guy's drunk on power and ketamine."
Yes, well, that's true.
Historian Johann Neem, a specialist in the American Revolution, turned to political theorist John Locke to explore the larger meaning of Trump's destructive course. The founders who threw off monarchy and constructed our constitutional government looked to Locke for their guiding principles.
Yeah. He's dead
In
now.
his 1692 treatise on government, Locke noted that when a leader disregards constitutional order, he gives up legitimacy, and the people are justified in treating him as a thief and robber.
Aha.
Does that remind you of somebody?
Yes.
Whosoever, in authority, exceeds the power given him by the law and makes use of the force he has under his command ceases, in that to be a magistrate acting without authority, he may be opposed as any other man who by force invades the right of another. Neem notes that Trump won the election and his party holds majorities. He could have used legitimate constitutional authority, but instead, with the aid of Elon Musk, he willingly breaks laws. Neem warned that courts move too slowly. He urged Congress to perform its constitutional duty. Good luck with that. Otherwise, Americans will be subject to a pretender who claims the power but not the legitimate authority of the presidency. That's where we are now.
Yes.
So this is one of the situations where you're perfectly justified in saying, well, he's your president, not my president. My president would follow the law.
Yeah. I know, and lots of people have said that of late, and without the same situation arising. That's the difference between people saying, well, Obama, he's not my president because I didn't like him or vote for him, versus this guy isn't serving as president.
Constitution, and I'm a constitutionalist.
Yeah.
That's a different story. You heard the Janet Mills story?
Of course, they thought so too, but yes. But we're
Janet Mills, governor of Maine,
yes,
is at some event, and Trump is there.
Governors of the states were meeting, and they were all at the White House for National Governors Association.
And it had to do with her response to immigration, and he didn't like how she was responding. So he tried to bully her. Is Governor of Maine here? Is Governor of Maine here? You're in a lot of deep crap, and you need to follow what I say. And she just smiled at him and said, see you in court.
Yeah, pretty much.
And he said, yeah, well, you're not going to be elected very long. And she
Right.
smiled again and said, you can't bully me. It's
Yeah.
not how it works.
It
And
was
he got really upset.
very, yeah. He was extremely childish, which, no surprise, but it was just astonishing to see with the collection of the nation's governors in the White House and the cameras on and everything. And by the way, making particular specific threats of illegal activity. Oh, you're not going to get any federal funding of any kind. I'm going to withhold it all unless you comply. Really?
Right.
You say that into the microphone one more time, sir.
Yeah. See you in court, Mr. President.
Yeah. Thanks for the evidence.
Heather Cox Richardson, the historian, brings up Maine's important role in fighting back for democracy. For example, June 1st, 1950. Senator Margaret Chase Smith delivered her famous Declaration of Conscience, standing up to Joe McCarthy, who was smearing Democrats as communists. She was a Republican from Maine. McCarthy was a Republican from Wisconsin. Quote, I think it's high time for the United States Senate and its members to do some real soul-searching and to weigh our consciences as to the manner in which we're performing our duty to the people of America and the manner in which we're using or abusing our individual powers. I do not want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the four horsemen of calumny, fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. Then, July 28th, 1974, Representative Bill Cohen, Republican in Maine, who went on to a long Senate career, at the time a junior member on the House Judiciary Committee, but voted along with 5 other Republican members and the Democratic majority to draw up articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon.
Right, okay.
Fully expecting that the death threats and hate mail he was going to receive and was receiving proved that the vote would destroy his political career. But Cohen told the Bangor Daily News, I'd never compromise what I think is the right thing to do for the sake of an office. It's just not that important.
Okay.
Days later, the tape proving Nixon had been part of the Watergate cover-up came to light. Suddenly, there was a switch. This is the interesting part. Suddenly, there was a switch in the people who had been defending the president. That's when people back in Maine, Republicans, started to turn around and say, you know what? We were wrong. You were right. It's a good week to remember that politicians used to use as a yardstick the old saying, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. So, pick on Janet Mills. There's a lot of historical precedent for, you're going to lose people when you do that. And that's the significance of all of those congressional what do they call them?
I don't know. What are we talking about?
Town hall meetings that
all
the Republicans are going to, and then seeing and hearing all sorts of flack.
Yes.
And as you pointed out, there's just tons of them. Greg Sargent points out, this is remarkable, Trump's own pollster just found that in swing House districts, Democrats lead by 5 points, and voters want tax policy to prioritize working people, not the rich.
All right.
So there's that. Tina Smith goes after Elon Musk harder than all the Democratic leaders in Congress, said Steve Dennis, Chris Murphy being the exception. New York Times highlights Murphy. Chris Murphy emerges as a clear voice for Democrats countering Trump. Then there's just innumerable. I mean, I've seen 7, 8, 9 stories.
Yes.
About how individual Republicans are getting hammered in their districts when they go back. And here's one from Wisconsin Public Radio. I have this in the pundit roundup, but let me give it to you here at the very bottom of the list that we have so you can find it easy. U.S. Representative Glenn Grothman faces hostile crowd at Oshkosh Town Hall meeting. Constituents ask Congressman about Medicaid funding, power of Elon Musk. Oshkosh, by gosh. Yeah. This is moving very quickly compared to other administrations that I think across the board he's done some very good things. Boos and shouts erupted when Grothman praised orders ending birthright citizenship and diversity, equity, and inclusion. The crowd got louder. Grothman updated constituents on 3 of his goals. One, he said, was welfare reform. Lots of problems. It discourages people from working. Several people shouted, no! I mean, this is what a lot of this was.
Yeah.
And Jennifer on Blue Sky notes, I think local news is doing a hell of a job covering the Doge fallout. Reporters are connecting the dots from D.C. to Main Street, going beyond acronyms to explain what government agencies do and giving voice to concerns of regular people. So she's got a whole Substack about that. Local news deserves high marks are covering the Doge fallout, and there is Doge fallout. Will Bunch in the Philadelphia Inquirer
Yes.
This is a gift article, so you and everybody else
I
can
love
read
gifts.
it from the Pundit
Sure.
Roundup. Rage over unelected billionaire Elon Musk sends protesters to Tesla showrooms as America wakes up to the reality of oligarchy, and goes over some of this. It's the constant Hitler salutes, Carlo told me. The family's half Italian, half Jewish. We're told to remember what happens when they come from marginalized people. It's really hard to turn away from that. Watching Musk with a chainsaw, literally.
Yes, right.
Prancing around CPAC with a chainsaw, and gives what all to the world looks like a Nazi salute. I've just done. I'm had it. And I found the Secret Service. It was the Secret Service that gave this. Managers suggested that federal employees who got this email list 5 accomplishments last week. Okay. And they sent around what you should do. This is the Sir Humphrey Appleby version.
Right.
Okay. This week I accomplished 100% of the tasks and duties required of me by my position description, 100% of the work product that my manager and I have agreed to, 100% of the duties and performance elements that are used to evaluate my performance, 100% of the deliverables requested of me by my direct supervisor. I exceeded expectations in the delivery of the above. Those are my 5 accomplishments.
Yeah, well stated. That's perfect. The way you handle it. Right. And then no one is in any position to dispute it. I mean, it's a non-answer answer, but it was a non-question question. So
right. The Pentagon took a different approach. They said, don't respond to this. We'll respond for you.
Yes. And that makes a good deal of sense, right? You're like, from the enlisted ranks, like you're not supposed to speak up. You need to stay quiet and let leadership answer. That's the rule. That's the order. Yeah, interesting. So lots of weird developments and more, as you pointed out, more Nazi salutes at CPAC. Steve Bannon joined in one of them. There's another speaker who I never heard of who's like a Mexican actor or something, decided to do one as well. Coming from all corners. I guess they're just trying to see if anybody arrests them for it, I guess.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or 2 would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let's keep rounding it all up. We've got politics from this country. We've got politics from other countries. We got politics from other planets, possibly. What's next on your list for today?
Well, let's just finish up with Maine here.
Yes, Maine.
One of the comments in the Pundit Roundup today, Guava Boy points out, news from Maine, February 23rd, 2025, with less than 36 hours notice, 200 Mainers came together for a See You in Court pop-up rally in Augusta.
That's good. That's good, nimble grassroots reactions happening.
Right. Trump's threats affect more. Oh, I know. It was over the trans stuff. That's what it was that Janet Mills was getting hammered on by Trump.
Yes.
Trump's threats affect more than
sports.
just sports, but also an array of services that prevent teen suicide, promote anti-bullying. 41 years after the murder of Charlie Howard, we need this work more than ever. And commenters pointed out, Maine is awesome and Janet Mills is great.
Yeah.
And remember,
very well.
The guy before him was a proto-Trumper. Paul Page or, somebody like that who I've already forgotten.
Right, Lepage, because France.
Yeah. So having Janet Mills, having ranked voting, it really has been a wonderful thing for Maine. And Maine has been wonderful for the country. And I always like that state anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. Blueberries, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Love
blueberries and lobster.
Yeah.
That's AH at the end.
Right.
So that's all good. Now, our Senate remains our Senate. U.S. Senator Bill Cassidy tweets yesterday. Please make sure your child is up to date on vaccines. Measles is highly contagious and serious. There's a big measles outbreak in Texas, which is spreading to New Mexico.
Well, everything's
Not
big
Mexico,
in Texas.
New Mexico. Our people, most of them unvaccinated.
Our Mexico, we should
And
call
Pat
it.
Dennis from American Bridge points out, look, don't look at what politicians say. Look at what they do. Cassidy voted to affirm RFK Jr., so screw him. A reminder, Bill Cassidy is up for re-election.
Okay.
Now,
And
Chris
even for
Murphy,
RFK,
who isn't, has this big glowing
His kids are
write-up
vaccinated.
in the New York Times about how he's emerging as a clear voice for Democrats countering Trump. He lost it when the mid-air collision happened.
Mm-hmm.
And then Trump was blaming diversity requirements at the FAA for the plane crash.
Right.
And Murphy had no time for that. Quote, everybody in this country should be outraged that Donald Trump is standing up on the podium and lying to you, deliberately lying to you, he said in an impassioned video he recorded and posted. Within 30 minutes of Trump's news conference, every single senator and member of Congress should call him out for how disgraceful it was. Now, he's not up for re-election. He was just re-elected last time.
Mm-hmm.
So does that matter? Look at the difference between Cassidy and Murphy. They're different people, different parties, but Murphy is not up for re-election, and Cassidy is, and duh.
Right. Well, there's a lot of duh happening these days.
Yeah,
So,
unfortunately.
plenty
Republican
of it.
governors worry of Trump balk at Medicaid letter. Also from the Pundit Roundup, this is something
yeah.
called Pluribus News. Never heard of it. But had an interesting write-up here. Republican governors wary of Trump balk at Medicaid letter. The impasse has left Democrats frustrated as deep cuts loom. They're threatening to cut Medicaid to finance big cuts for the wealthy. And that's not going to be popular. It's never been popular. Usually has blowback on local politicians. Mm-hmm. So the Democratic governors were trying to work with the National Governors Association for a bipartisan letter. And most of the Republican governors refused. They have sign-on from the National Association of Counties, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, National League of Cities, the National Conference of State Legislatures, the Council of State Governments, the International City-County Management Association. They all signed the letter. It was addressed to Thune, Schumer, Johnson, and Jeffries. Jared Polis asked Republican governors to sign it, but the vice chair, Kevin Stitt, refused. He vetoed the letter instead. The National Governors Association on Saturday said governors had agreed to a statement supporting flexibility and waiver opportunities in funding for Medicaid. So a watered down doesn't say anything sort of thing. And so, Republican governors are afraid. They need to go to some of these town halls and get hit with, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And the blowback is going to be for them as well.
Well,
It's going to take time.
It's coming. Yeah, and people aren't necessarily waiting for town halls to do it either. As you pointed out, some of them heading out to Tesla dealerships. Others just putting themselves on somebody's route to some event that they're not invited to. And we're going to be outside. We heard the governor's going to speak at this place. We're going to be outside the gates of it yelling at him when he goes by.
In fact, I told Will Bunch that, the author of the Tesla article in the Philly Inquirer, that the town halls and the Tesla protests are basically the same thing. They're
same things are being
grassroots
said.
People speaking up at places that they can.
Where can we put pressure? I'm frustrated and I want to yell at somebody. I'm going to go to a location and you know what? Instead of being the lone nut somewhere, turns out there's 50 or 100 other people who got the same idea and, because of the same things are happening. We all see it. It's interesting. It's a good idea to show up to Tesla deal. People were arguing with one another on social media. Which dealership should we go to? People protesting towns with multiple dealerships. Now, this one's got a better location. Cover them both. Go ahead. Don't worry about it.
People argue. That's what they do.
Yes.
Nobody has the same response to everything unless you're a MAGA Trumper or an old Rush Limbaugh did basically the same thing.
Yes. And even then.
So I'm looking at the Never-Trumpers and what's happening to them. They have an organization called Principles First. Heath Mayo, I think, is the director.
That's where
and they're basically trying to organize around, what to do. It's a much smaller group than Democrats, who are the major opposition, but they often work with Democrats on stuff. And what's interesting to me about it, this article from Notice, a pretty long-ass hangover. Never-Trump Republicans meet to discuss what's next. Anti-Trump Republicans are divided on a host of issues, but they're all trying to figure out where to go from here. So if you think the Democratic Party doesn't have its act together because, like, everybody's not speaking from the same page, that's normal. It hasn't been that long.
Not just for Democrats.
And it's not just for Democrats. Exactly right. So the Republicans are in the same, say, whoa, if we were only more like Republicans, everybody would automatically. No, that's really not how it works.
It's not working that way right now inside not only the Republican Party, but the Trump administration.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't work like that. That Principles First organization was the one holding the event where Mike Fanoni was and then was confronted by Enrique Tarrio.
Right. I went through my kumbaya phase. We've got to work with these people, former Capitol cop Michael Fanone told the crowd. F that. We got to get everybody from MAGA out, never hold office again.
Yes.
The Principles First Summit has established itself as Washington's preeminent Never-Trump gathering this year.
Really?
Speakers ran from Reagan Republicans like John Bolton and Asa Hutchinson to Democrats like Colorado Governor Jared Polis, who's tempered his liberalism to appeal to these former Republicans, to George Conway, who always hated Trump. But it's a difficult time to be a Never-Trump Republican. Just a little over a year ago, Republicans ready to turn the page at Nikki Haley, and then she didn't, with Haley adding rhetorical insult to electoral injury, quickly endorsing Trump. Yeah. True believers in the Never-Trump movement that have then advocated for Biden, who later had to drop out. Then they pushed for Harris, who decisively lost. It wasn't really that decisive, but she definitely lost. Their message about protecting democracy fell on deaf ears in swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona, and the theory that Trump was a 2016 fluke turned out to be resoundingly false. He sucks, he's a Nazi, he's a fascist, said Mark Cuban in his keynote address. How did that work in the campaign? It didn't.
Yeah.
Never-Trumpers have 47 months to endure this president, and at the top of mind is how to move forward, but if there's one takeaway, it's that there's little agreement to actually do that. So some of them would get up there and say it's a constitutional crisis, and Asa Hutchinson said, that's not that bad. Don't overstate the case. Does that sound familiar?
Yes, but I don't know. Asa Hutchinson, I don't know. Well, it's a
we should be doing everything possible, including working with Democrats. We should steer clear from Democrats. You got everything there.
Yeah. Interesting, though. I see somebody picked up on. I imagine when they said, it's quickly become the premier gathering. Well, this is their first gathering, but I imagine the press release said it's the premier gathering of. So they wrote it. It's the power of PR there. But okay, I mean, these guys together as an organization are an unknown and have done nothing. They have organized a conference.
Michael Steele put his finger on what the issue is. Well, firstly, they're new. So in terms of whether they've done anything or not.
They're not the premier anything. This is their premier, but they are not the premier anything yet.
Well,
but okay,
premier in the sense that they're getting known speakers like Michael Fanone and Mark Cuban, people you've heard of, Chris Christie.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of speakers that you have heard of who agreed to go to this conference. That's what makes it premier.
I guess so. For instance, were we the premier gathering when we had at Netroots Nation the Democratic candidates come for debate?
Absolutely.
Well, we were, but we got instead a bunch of weirdo hippies got together and squatted in a conference hall somewhere. All right.
Well, the New York Times thinks that Zelensky has to really consider how he's getting along with Trump because that's what's the most important thing about what's going on in Ukraine, right? I mean, so, the press can suck it, but the fact of the matter is that, you get all the presidential contenders there for the debate, you are a premier meeting.
Yeah, all right. So it's 20 years later. I want everyone to know that was a premier meeting. You were there. You knew it.
And we said so. Yeah. In any case,
yes,
Michael Steele has his finger on the pulse, and I think he had a good response to Notice. He said, Trump isn't a phase. I think it's head-up-ass kind of thinking to say so. A phase is a hangover. Then you get your stuff together and you go to work. You go back to business. We're 10 years into this. This is a pretty long-ass hangover. It's not a phase. This is acceptance. And part of the reason that the Never Trumpers are divided is they still think they can go back to the old party. That's where Asa Hutchinson is coming from when he says, oh, well, it's not a constitutional crisis. And Joe Walsh says, that's gone. Your daddy's Republican Party ain't here anymore. And I've been saying every hour it's a constitutional crisis. And that's basically the split in thinking there.
Yeah.
And the ones who haven't come around want to go back to the old Reagan Republican, used car dealers supporting them, be conservative and get along with everybody. But, that party's gone.
Yeah.
I don't think the party's gone away. I think underneath people still believe the same things Bolton told notice. Again, Bolton has always been a jerk. He's always been unable to really grasp what's going on. More proof right here with that statement. But again, a difference in the split in thinking. Joe Walsh says, I don't know what's wrong with you. Michael Steele says, I don't know what's wrong with you. The old party's gone. And Bolton and Hutchinson are saying, no, it's still there. We can bring it back. We're the leaders who will. Come on. No.
Okay. Well, they're used to being considered leaders of things.
But, Bolton didn't go far enough. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that he endorsed Biden and then Harris, as many of the Never Trumpers did, despite many on our side thinking they never would. And they worked to try to get Harris elected. Didn't, come to fruition, but they tried.
Okay.
So is Bolton a good guy or a bad guy? He's still a bad guy. He did all the things that are bad.
Yes.
He hasn't changed, but I'll accept his vote.
Okay.
I mean, it's just that simple. So there's no reason to rail about how bad John Bolton is. I know. I'm not interested.
Right.
I want to know what he's going to do now. And so for him to say, well, the party really hasn't changed. The old party's still there. It isn't. And so you're broken and you can't see and you don't have vision. And, but I don't take it personally. You're not a Trumper, and that's okay. For now, Republican Party can have that wing. You just have to decide how you're going to coexist with your other wing of the Never Trumpers, a small faction, but the larger portion of the Never Trumpers are, this party is broken. And this is a constitutional crisis. You will come around when you see it's a constitutional crisis. What will make it a constitutional crisis for everybody to see, even normies, is when Trump refuses to do what the courts suggest he needs to. Yeah. And that's coming, and that hasn't happened yet, but it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening in small ways that aren't broadly recognized by everyone as for what they are just yet. But certainly there are court orders with which he is out of compliance.
You can go around and get another
right. I didn't do
different court to say, okay, well, you don't have standing, or it's okay to go ahead and do that
Supreme
thing that the courts had blocked you on a month ago. Just finish it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and we have the appeals process to deal with, and I guess everybody's standing around waiting for a Supreme Court ruling that everyone understands, and then the thing that is being demanded is not happening and everyone can see it. Then people will be upset with that.
Yep.
Okay.
Anyway, let's go to Germany.
Now?
Yeah.
All right.
This is from The Guardian. Germany swung to the right. What does that mean for the country
everyone.
And with Europe? Our panel responds. So the resistance to the far right has to get serious now, says one panel. AfD can't be ignored now. So they're happy. 80% voted for liberal democracy, on the other hand, and Merz should govern for them. Merz is going to be the new chancellor. The way it works in Germany is you elect a party, then the head of the party becomes chancellor. And it will be head of the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, or in Bavaria as it's known, CSU, but otherwise largely known as the Union.
Okay.
The centrist party scored historically bad results. Right cast mud, the far right gained, the party system fragmented, but it was much smaller swing than expected to the right, particularly in light of a campaign focused on immigration and the role of the far right. Interestingly, it was a large participation election. Okay. As Bill Kristol here in the U.S. points out, AfD had about 20% on January 20th. And then Elon and J.D. Vance went all in on AFD, the Nazi party there.
Right.
Exit polls have AFD at just under 20%, which is still too high, but Elon and J.D. Vance's efforts basically came to naught, said Bill Kristol. They're exactly where they were before these guys got involved.
Flatlined them.
So that's of help. So
okay.
The results showed a Rechtsdruck, a swing to the right, but much smaller than expected right, Casmud, who's very sharp, who's a combination that has proved to be a perfect breeding ground for recent far-right victories in Western Europe, the immigration issue. Europe, for example, Sweden in 2022 and the Netherlands in 2023. It's true that a small majority of Germans did vote for anti-immigration parties, but all of them underperformed. The conservative CDU won most of the seats. It didn't top 30%. The far-right AFD came second, but at just over 20% fell short of its performance in state elections.
Okay.
The left conservative BSW failed to win enough seats to enter the Bundestag at all, despite a year of media hype about its prospects. They're interesting because when they say left conservative, what they mean is that they're socially leftist, but pro-Russia.
Huh.
They're a weird party.
That is a weird party.
And they didn't make it in.
Pro-Soviet.
And I have more to say about where those parties voted and where their votes from last time went. Rather than declaring a minority that voted for the far right to be the German people, the centrist party should accept and address the pluralism, but realize they got 80% of the vote and govern accordingly.
All right. I mean,
right. So
who am I to object?
In a somewhat somber mood, Germany's Christian Democrats celebrated their victory. Friedrich Merz is set to fulfill a lifelong dream at the age of 69. After 3 failed attempts, he's becoming chancellor. A business lawyer who has done quite well for himself during a decade outside professional politics, Merz has never actually governed. But even without that experience, the future chancellor knows what challenges he faces. He's a cultural conservative, but liberal in his economics. He's expressed his personal disgust with members of the AFD. He has pledged not to allow them into the cabinet and not do any coalition with them.
All right.
He doesn't greet them, even when caught alone in an elevator, in like secret camera recordings. So, he doesn't like them.
That sounds good.
Now, Merz's CDU finds itself in a quandary, while the Social Democrats, who he'll have to govern in coalition with, even though the outgoing Chancellor Scholz says, I'm not ready to talk to them. Obviously, he wants to hold out for a deal. They paint him as a right-wing populist who's paving the way for the far right, but that's not really going on. The AfD recently yelled at him in the Bundestag, "We're the future, Herr Merz. Follow us." Many in the CDU fear that this will be their last chance. If the center parties don't manage to solve our country's problems, the next elections will be lost, Merz said. But the central pitch of his campaign has been a global one. He's a staunch transatlanticist. He's pro-European. He sees Germany as the forefront of the worldwide clash between democracies and authoritarians. So in that sense, he's very much on our side, our being the U.S. folks who voted for Harris.
Oh, okay, yes.
Okay. The second remarkable result comes from the left-wing Linke. It's been written off as a dead party, likely not going to make it into the Bundestag again, but Linke strongly increased its support. Many believe the party managed to attract progressive voters who were alienated by SPD and Greens, especially on migration in Gaza. While many progressives turned their backs on the SPD a long time ago, the Greens seemed like the natural home for these voters, but part of a government that pushed through draconian measures against asylum seekers and running a campaign strongly focused on the center, the Greens didn't manage to gain voter support. The biggest losses were among younger voters. Their former stronghold, they voted for Linke instead. And it's now the strongest party in Berlin. It should be a lesson for left and progressive parties in Europe that moving right can be costly strategy because progressive voters will look for a new home. So that's of interest.
All right.
And I have a couple of charts I sent you, which I thought were really fascinating. The first one, Wahler means voter.
Okay.
And even if you don't speak German, you can figure out what Wanderung means.
Yeah.
The wandering voter. What happened to the voter from the last election?
The wanderer. Yeah.
Exactly.
That guy.
Yeah.
That hair.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Herr Dion and the Belmonts, right?
Okay.
So The Green Party lost 460,000 voters to the new CDU, who's going to be the Chancellor Party.
Okay.
And then, again, even if you don't speak German, you can figure this out. Nichtwahler.
Nichtwahler.
Not a voter. Those voters who didn't vote
you
in the
told us
last
the
election.
Waller was voter, yeah.
900,000 of them voted for the Union.
Oh.
CDU.
Okay.
FDP, which is the pro-NAFTA party, lost 1.3 million voters who voted for the Union instead. And SPD, which was the governing party, lost 1.7 million to the Union. Meanwhile, Union voters who went to other parties were much less. The concerning number is that 1 million Union voters voted for AfD this time, mostly in East Germany.
Yes, that's what I heard.
70,000 went from Union to Linke, and 220,000 went to BSW, the socially left pro-Russian party, and they're not going to make it anywhere, so they're out. So
that
that's
is an interesting
one
chart.
of the ways to look at this. The other, though, maybe more important, is that 1.8 million voters who didn't vote last time voted for AfD.
Oh.
So just like in this country, when people who don't normally vote
decide what the hell I'll vote.
Decide what the hell's going on, and basically they came out to vote for the rightists.
Go back to East Germany.
Union got and the other parties together got more than what AfD did, but AfD got the largest share of non-voters.
I see.
So there's always a lot of non-voters out there who basically don't pay attention, who aren't really, tuned into what's going on, but will vote for rightist candidates and are very, to my mind, subject to propaganda.
Yeah.
And manipulation. And they will come out and they will vote for the other side. And we've seen that with enough elections that we've lost that we have to take that quite seriously. And that's what happened in Germany as well.
Well, sorry, Germany, but okay.
So I think there's a lesson there.
Yeah.
I don't like the lesson, but I think there's a lesson.
No. Difficult to tell exactly. Yeah, I feel like, one thing about these charts is all the movement. It's not dynamic in the sense of showing people moving left and right. It's just moving parties, but everything's pointing right.
But, I guess at the same time, you have to remember, and we have to remember this in our own elections, it's not that these voters are changing their minds. It's that different elections have different voter constituencies, different voter makeups.
Right, that's true too. These non-voters.
So it's not like, that's why the non-voter is so important. They didn't change their mind. They changed their mind about whether to vote. They didn't change their mind about which party they were supporting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were likely always, to the extent they were interested in anything, interested in, I don't know, I guess reactionary right would be me if I voted, but I'm not reactionary enough to go and vote. This time I am. All right. I'm for them. It's not
something's motivating.
It's not progressive saying I changed my mind.
The economy isn't, in great shape right now. And the car makers are having issues, and that helps run the German economy.
Yes.
And tariffs aren't going to help. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on that they have to deal with. It isn't just social issues.
Mm-hmm. Many of them filled with Bavarian cream, probably.
But, the fact of the matter is that the new chancellor is going to be pro-NATO. And so that's important.
Yeah,
and
whether
regardless
we are
of how many
is another
votes
question.
AfD got, they're not going to be in the government this time.
We certainly will. We hope that he sticks to that pledge, and I assume that they'll call snap elections before giving in to that impulse. Exactly. Even if they find that they can't govern without them, they'll say, well, then we'll just have more elections.
Right.
Okay, I hope they stick to that. Sounds like he's going to.
Let's see if there's any other things of note in the last 2 minutes that I want to tell you about that I haven't told you already. Let's see. No, I think I pretty much covered everything I wanted to.
Okay. Well, how about we can mention, I'll read a little bit more about it, but we talked about it a little bit during the break. In Idaho, where another town hall meeting went off the rails. Not a congressional town hall meeting, but a state legislative town hall meeting in which the Coeur d'Alene papers are reporting that someone who spoke up, and it's a prominent local Democratic activist and candidate who has spoken up and was dragged out by security people who would not identify themselves, wore no badges, refused to answer any questions about who they were. They apparently work for a private security company, and no one will acknowledge having hired them. It's a very weird situation happening there.
Right. And this political breaking news, federal judge just blocked Office of Personnel Management, Education Department from sharing personal information with Doge. The government's massive HR department cannot share sensitive information, saying the decision to grant Doge access appears to breach federal privacy laws, 2-week restraining order while she collects information for hearings, which is what judges do.
Okay. Well, that's one thing she's done this week. Put it in the email.
Yes.
But not you. You're not supposed to.
Right.
All right. That's good news. A common sense finding for what's actually happening here. And a temporary restraining order, which it's supposed to put the brakes on things. But, yeah.
And especially when you have the indication that the judge basically in her ruling says, I'm putting a 2-week restraining order here. But since what you're doing is illegal, this suit has a good chance of succeeding.
Yes, it's a good indication.
That's what
of which
really puts
direction
the brakes on
this is
it,
going to
not
happen.
the restraining order.
Yeah, and there will be violations, but they will weigh heavily against them if the government is pushing back and trying to avoid having a temporary restraining order turn into an injunction.
What Josh Gerstein points out is this ruling seems likely to broadly halt Doge access unless it's overturned.
Okay. Well,
so Josh Gerstein's a pretty smart legal guy, so I hope that's true.
It will certainly put a legal barrier in their path. I guess we'll have to see whether or not.
It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, no, it's a good way to
start. What
start.
are the Democrats doing? They're using the courts. Why? Yeah. This is why.
Right. Now we just have to find out whether that word reaches the people who are manning the doors at the next place Doge demands access to, and whether they say, no, that's actually illegal, you have to go away, instead of
I want you to write me an email saying 5 reasons why you're not going to listen to me. This judge, this judge, this judge, this judge, and this judge.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's take a tour through Pocket and other sources of information. As I told you, I do have more and actual solid information from local sources about what happened in Idaho, and everyone's favorite daughter of Idaho, Joan McCarter, I saw chiming in on Blue Sky yesterday, just reminding everybody that, look, I've always told you, she says that, I'll have to find the actual post, but always told you that Idaho would be sort of a canary in a coal mine with respect to reactionary fascistic politics. And so the warning lights going on here. While there was lots of blowback elsewhere at congressional and other town hall meetings and other public events, no one was dragged out. It was you had to go to Idaho to find yourself dragged out in the middle of all this. I have a story here from the Coeur d'Alene Post Falls Press, the folks most local on the scene here. The headline has if you have been following it all along, this will qualify as an update for you. Otherwise, it's just a regular date. Not even an update, just regular date. But an update for them, for people who have followed this closely on the town hall chaos. Woman who was dragged out speaks, police chief condemns security, name of security firm confirmed. Firm confirmed. And as I mentioned, there's much more to the story than local woman yells. One, she's a well-known local personality, activist, Democratic candidate for office, and a doctor. by the way. I don't know what kind of doctor, but I have when they get around to finally telling you her full name and title, people who are in the know say, yeah, doctor, and it's Teresa Borenpol. I'm hoping I'm close on pronunciation, Borrenpohl. And Idaho's the kind of place where people all know one another, and she's a more than well-known quantity here. But Kay Thornbruh, Brugh, is the staff writer at the Coeur d'Alene paper here, covering the situation. This is the update. I'm going to have to read it all through, I think, so we can get some sense of this stuff. Sometimes, well, in many cases, the beauty of reading the local paper is they know things inside and out, and you'll get this full story. The downside sometimes, we'll see whether this is the case here, is that they assume that readers know more than they do, and if you're coming in from the outside, you might find yourself confused. But here's the deal. A legislative town hall organized by the, ready for another pronunciation issue, is it Kootenai? Kootenai, Kootenai, and I've done this before, and I think Justice has sent me a pronunciation guide in the past on this one, and certainly Joan has given me a hint on this one. But all right, well, this may be, I don't know. I think we're closer enough here. Kootenai, maybe. County Republican Central Committee there organized this town hall meeting, which I guess is what gave them the confidence to say, well, we're Republicans, we organize this person's a Democrat, get out of here. But a town hall, I think they were just borrowing the terminology town hall. They didn't really, I guess, it seems they didn't really have any interest in having people from the town come and be heard at this meeting. And that was part of the issue. Okay, so the whole thing devolved into chaos on Saturday, because that's the day they held it, when unidentified plainclothes security personnel, and I mean, they're plain clothes in the sense that they're unmarked, but they're in all black and, or it looks like dark green pants and black jackets, very nondescript looking. And you wouldn't necessarily pick them out as security, except that they have little things in their ears. But now everybody has things in their ears. Anyway, devolved into chaos on Saturday when unidentified plainclothes security personnel dragged a Post Falls woman, she is that, from the Coeur d'Alene High School auditorium for heckling legislators. Though the company that provided security for the event has been identified, town hall organizers and the Kootenai, County Sheriff Bob Norris have claimed no knowledge of the security personnel or who hired them. That is really surprising. Coeur d'Alene Police Chief Lee White confirmed Sunday that the men who dragged Teresa Borenpol from the meeting worked for the private security firm Lear Asset Management. It's Lear, all caps. I don't know whether it stands for anything or they're just stylizing by putting it in all caps, but that's how it's typeset here. Lear Asset Management, like the private jet. Any relation? I don't know. Reached by phone on Saturday and Sunday, the firm's owner, Hayden resident, it might be Hayden the way they pronounce things there. It's Hayden, it's the local town there. The resident, Paul Truett, declined to comment. As the town hall got underway and legislators made their remarks, Borenpol said the audience cheered and jeered at turns. Nobody was telling people cheering to stop cheering, but anytime there was a negative reaction, we were scolded, she said. I felt uncomfortable, she said, she probably felt uncomfortable when they dragged her out, but I felt comfortable expressing displeasure because people were very openly expressing their appreciation for the legislators there. She thought that perhaps both sides ought to be heard from in this town hall meeting, but apparently not. Borenpol said the turning point came when Representative Ron Mendive, that's how it's spelled, men dive off cliffs, Mendive, who is a Republican, of course, and from Coeur d'Alene, spoke about how he helps to take care of Idaho's public lands as co-chair of the Resources and Conservation Committee. I screamed, out of turn, admittedly, Phil Hart stole timber from public land, Borenpol said. That's when they seized on me. Now, I guess if you're from Idaho, that makes sense to you. Like if you're from outside, you say, well, I don't know, it might be the people in Idaho say, who? Phil Hart, because apparently it was a while ago. But I guess in Idaho, the locals know what that means. And the writer does too. The writer tells us that in 2010, so it's a while now, the press, that is the newspaper we're talking about, this is the Coeur d'Alene Post Falls Press, and not just the press generally, but maybe that too. But in 2010, they reported that Senator Phil Hart, a Republican of Kellogg, issued a $2,450 check to the state for the 1996 market value of logs that he took from state school endowment land to build his home. All right, now that's got to be there. You know, an Idahoan can tell you the ins and outs of that. But I guess one, we're talking about state. I can manage from this to the state school endowment land. Okay, fine. So this land is managed to the benefit of the state school system, and logs taken from it or any value extracted from it, I guess, when it's paid for, the money goes to a school trust fund or something like that. I can figure that out. And so in 1996, this guy, whether he was a state senator or not at the time, I'm not sure, but Phil Hart decided, I want logs from this state-owned land. Okay. And so, well, no, it's state-owned, or you have to pay for it. And I guess he just went in there and took them, which I guess is a thing that you might be able to think you could get away with in Idaho. And he just went logging on state land and built a house with it somehow. Okay. I mean, that's, building your house from scratch, all right, doing it from logs. I don't know whether he was building a log cabin or he was finishing these things into boards. I got no idea. Doesn't matter. Then, of course, the fact is that he did it in 1996 and didn't get held to account for it until 2010. So 15 years after he takes the logs, fine, I'll pay. And he pays the 1996 market value, which I guess is a fair thing, sort of, except, I don't know what happened to the value of the house, etc. But then, so 15 years after he paid, which is 15 years after he stole the logs, Teresa Borenpol yells out in the meeting, Phil Hart stole the money, stole the logs from state endowment land and state school endowment land. Oh my gosh. And so I don't know. It goes back a ways. We're talking about a 30-year-old theft that she's screaming about. But okay, point well taken, except it wasn't well taken. Or the point was well taken. Then she was poorly taken out of the hall for having made the point, I suppose. Borenpol said she didn't recognize Kootenai County Sheriff Bob Norris at first when he approached her in the semi-darkness of the auditorium because he was dressed in jeans and a baseball cap. I was really dumbfounded because he said, do you want me to pepper spray you? And I mean, I'd be dumbfounded too. No, that's a dumb question. Of course I don't want you to pepper spray me. Why are you asking? Anyway, that was the first thing he said to me that I remember. Footage from the event showed Norris take Borenpol's arm with both hands and make multiple attempts to pull her from her seat. Borenpol said that after she declined to leave, Norris turned to the unidentified men and said, guys, get her. Now, this is a guy, Bob Norris, now in the aftermath is like, I don't know who those guys were, and I don't know who hired them either. But I did know to turn to them and say, guys, get her. That is a weird situation. I don't think he's telling us the truth. On video, Borenpol can be repeatedly seen repeatedly asking the men to identify themselves. They did not. She asked Norris if the men were his deputies, and he gave no answer. So he knew what was going on. Kootenai County GOP officials said Saturday they didn't know which company provided security for their event and told the press to seek that information from the sheriff, which is interesting because I don't think the sheriff was involved in hiring security for a Republican event, unless he did so as a officer of the Republican county party. But I mean, somebody must have made a call to a security company and said, we want you to be here, we'll pay you. That's how security firms work. Who said they'd pay you? That's the person we need to talk to. No one can figure this out, apparently, because no one wants to fess up to it, of course. Let's see. Bob Norris was right there, KCRCC chair, the county Republican committee. Brent Regan said, unless he pronounces it Reagan, I don't know. There's only the one A at the end. Regan. Nothing was done without him being aware. For some reason, they think it's extremely important that the local sheriff know what's going on. So I don't know. It seems to be like the local party is saying the sheriff was somehow involved in selecting and hiring security, which could be true, but I don't know why they're not able to figure this part out. Norris said his handling of Boren Poll was in line with protocols that were set before the town hall began, though he did not explain what the protocols were or who had set them. You know, protocols. I roughed her up because protocols. Boren Poll was asked to leave, he said Sunday. She was asked to leave. You know, well, I asked you to leave. You didn't go. With recordings of Norris and the security guards pulling on Boren Poll circulating widely on social media, Norris said he's received death threats and he believes the incident is not being covered fairly. The security guards' reactions was to Boren Poll's action, Norris said. The reason why that occurred was people came to disrupt. White said it's not appropriate. I forget who White is along the way here, but White said it's not appropriate for law enforcement to forcefully remove a person from a town hall for speaking out of turn or shouting. I don't care what your message is, especially in an open town hall like this, White said. We have to respect everybody's First Amendment rights, regardless of what side of the aisle you happen to sit on. I know there are some people up here who probably disagree with me and would like us to take action and maybe try to silence a voice that's in opposition to theirs at a town hall. But there's very little we can do with regard to the First Amendment protections. We have to make sure that people have the protections afforded to them under the Constitution, except when they don't, like here, for some strange reason. Mary Rosedahl attended the town hall and described watching the sheriff attempt to pull Boren Poll from her seat, then beckoned to the security personnel. Rosedahl, who's a nurse, said she stood nearby during the incident because she feared for Boren Poll's safety. They came in, and they took her by the arms, and they pulled her, and they took her by the feet, and they pulled her into the aisle, she said. And they laid her face down on the floor. Two of them were on top of her, holding her down, and then eventually they boosted her up on her feet and dragged her out the door. I was worried about their handling. Boren Poll said she remembers hands coming from everywhere, trying to haul her from her seat and pushing her to the ground. To her left, she said, she heard friends defending her while people across the aisle jeered at her and applauded the men who were attempting to remove her from the auditorium. As the men dragged her down the aisle, Boren Poll lost her shoe, and at one point her shirt nearly came off. It was really violent and really traumatic, she said. They grabbed my wrists, they contorted my body, they lifted me up and dropped me down. My only thought was to maintain my airway. They were forcing me down on the ground. I just wanted to make sure I could still breathe. Boren Poll said she bit one of the men who was dragging her from the auditorium. I didn't know if I was being detained by what I now knew to be the sheriff's office, or if these were private hired guns, she said. I was so confused, and I didn't know if I was being arrested by the sheriff's office or I was being kidnapped. And that's the problem with unidentified officers who wear no badges and won't identify who they're working for or why. You don't really know. White confirmed that Boren Poll was cited and released for misdemeanor battery because of the bite, though he noted that the officers who responded to CHS, the high school, didn't have access to the numerous video recordings that showed what happened before they arrived. Now that we are in receipt of several videos that show the majority of the event that we didn't have at the time, the battery citation will be under review by our prosecutor's office, he said. White said his officers declined the sheriff's request that Boren Poll be arrested for trespassing. We respectfully informed the sheriff that since this was an open to the public event, we are not going to arrest anyone for trespassing, White said. That would be inappropriate. I got to go back and look up who's who here. Police and prosecutors will also consider the actions of the security guards, White said. I hope so. Coeur d'Alene City Code requires security agents to wear uniforms, quote, clearly marked with the words security in letters no less than 1 inch tall on the front and no less than 4 inches tall on the back. There's nothing. As you can see in the pictures, the security personnel at Saturday's town hall wore plain clothes with no visible sign that they were security. When the Coeur d'Alene City Council approved the uniform requirements last summer, Truett testified against the change. Truett was the owner of Lear Security. Paul Truett contacted me and told me they wouldn't be doing any security of that type in our city, and yet here they are, White said. As far as I know, Lear Asset Management has a license, but not a license to perform activities such as this. So they may be unlicensed. Interesting. Or at least for this event. And at some point when they passed the rule, and what an onerous rule, security people have to have uniforms that say security on them, or else they can't work an event in the city. Well, I'm so mad about that, I'll never do an event in this city ever again, rather than have to comply with your tyrannical rules. Oh, wait, I can get paid? Okay, here I am. But still not complying with the tyrannical rules. If Lear Asset Management is determined to have violated city ordinances, White said, and I guess it's obvious that they did, the city can suspend or revoke the firm's license, and the city prosecutor may take action. Norris said that he was invited to lead the Pledge of Allegiance at the town hall and remained on site after doing so, this is the sheriff, because of a recent threat against Representative Jordan Redman, a Republican of Coeur d'Alene, allegedly. On Saturday morning, Coeur d'Alene police were investigating a threat against Redman's office that originated on social media. White said his agency only learned about the town hall because Redman mentioned it when they spoke with him about the threat. Oh, that's interesting. At this point now, I really want to go back and identify who White is that we're talking about here, and I lost track of it along the way. And I'm hoping to see the first mention of his name somewhere so that we can get some sense of who this is. And I'm kind of far down in the article, and I'm just not seeing it. No? Anyway, well, see, I guess if you're local, you'd know who White was, even though it's not been mentioned here anywhere. I mean, I've gone back all the way to the top of the article here. And, you know, capital W is an easy thing. There we are. Coeur d'Alene Police Chief Lee White. Different from the county sheriff, Bob Norris. Okay, so there's some tension for you all. So the city police chief seems to be taking things fairly seriously, whereas the sheriff, who I assume probably thinks he has some sort of weird constitutional mandate to do whatever the hell he wants, is doing something completely different, and the private security guys are in compliance with nobody's rules, apparently. Okay, so let's see. So on Saturday morning, Coeur d'Alene police, where White is the chief, they were investigating a threat against this person's office, Representative Jordan Redman, and so the local police, the Coeur d'Alene police, only learned that there even was a town hall event happening in their city because Redman mentioned it when they spoke to him about the threat. How interesting is that? Coeur d'Alene police officers were in the parking lot at CHS during the town hall in case the Shoshone County resident who allegedly made the threat, I guess against Redman, appeared. When there was a disturbance in the auditorium, no one alerted the officers from Coeur d'Alene City Police until after bourne pole had been removed. Norris said this was because it wasn't the agency's place to act. So the sheriff says, we'll handle it. This is not the city police's business. They don't have jurisdiction, he said, of the Coeur d'Alene Police Department about an event happening in the Coeur d'Alene High School for some strange reason. They would not have come into a private event held at the high school, and the person who secures the location gets to set the protocols of what occurs. White pushed back on Norris's comment. Coeur d'Alene High School is squarely within his agency's jurisdiction, he said, and these officers would have entered the building had they been called sooner. We would have stood by to make sure no one was in danger, while at the same time protecting people's First Amendment rights, as opposed to the county sheriff who violated them, I would add. Rosedal, who regularly attends town halls and other political events, called Saturday's scene terrible and said she's concerned that the chaos will have a chilling effect on political speech in Kootenai County. It was a time for our legislators and the moderator to put forward their ideas about government, but there was no public feedback, she said. They didn't want to hear what the community had to say. That was very clear. Borenpol ran as a Democrat for a legislative seat in 2020, 2022, and 2024. So in case you're like, oh, why don't you do something about your strident opposition and run for office? No problem there. She's done it 3 times. During the past several years, amid North Idaho College's accreditation crisis, she vocally criticized 3 former NIC trustees who were backed by the Kootenai County GOP, as we like to call them here. So, again, good local baseball stuff that all the locals understand and know, and we don't. But there's more about Phil Hart again. I didn't know if I was in trouble for saying Phil Hart stole from public lands or if it was because I am a known Democrat in the area, she said. The town hall was meant to be a forum where constituents could engage with their legislators, Borenpol said. That's maybe the difference between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats think town halls means the town gets to speak, and Republicans think that means the town is held captive and have to listen to them speak. I guess that's a big difference. She said she was denied that opportunity to speak out. Borenpol also alleges she was assaulted. I think that my civil rights were stripped from me in that moment and in a really embarrassing way, she said. Admittedly, I spoke out of turn, but do we live in a country where you speak out of turn and the result is 3 men assaulting a woman? Well, I guess we do live in that country. So there you have it. I don't know. I thought the detail makes it more real, and there was the interesting confusion between the police agencies, the non-denial denials about who hired who, and clearly a long history of partisan conflict in the area that colored the whole thing. And I don't know, it's not, national level news like we're used to seeing, but a lot of people talking about this, the video widely circulating, and I thought you might appreciate getting the local angle on all of the activity from there. How about this? We'll go national again. You got to go and read a headline that's something like this: an opinion piece in a small paper from New York City known as The Times. The guest opinion essay, America has a rogue president. A little bit more about whether or not you should be saying he's yours or not, for instance, as Greg was mentioning. They're talking about Donald Trump. This is Frank Kendall. Mr. Kendall, they note for us helpfully, was the Secretary of the Air Force in the Biden administration. And therefore, I'm sure it is of some concern to him that Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump and Elon Musk, I guess, have fired most of the top brass at the Pentagon, and this will get at some of the inherent danger and all of that as well. And let's read what Mr. Kendall has to say. President Trump's decision to fire senior military leaders without cause is foolish and a disgrace. It politicizes our professional military in a dangerous and debilitating way. What frightens me even more is the removal of 3 judge advocates general, the most senior uniformed legal authorities in the Defense Department. That's a good point, too. Much discussed over the weekend as well. Their removal is one more element of this administration's attack on the rule of law, and an especially disturbing part. But in case we don't get to it before the break, long story short on that one is they fired not only the service chiefs and the Joint Chiefs chairperson, but also fired the highest ranking judge advocates general. In other words, the people who would judge for us whether or not orders, obeyed or otherwise, issued by the Trump administration are in fact legal, right? We always note for the record that you're only required to obey legal orders from the commander-in-chief. How do you know whether they're legal? That would, of course, in the moment you won't know, but ultimately that would be decided by the judge advocates general. When people get court-martialed for not obeying the orders, they can defend themselves by saying it would not be a legal order. The judge advocate general, if they do, in fact, after court-martial trial, find that the order was illegal, would then, I guess, clear you of those charges. But if you take somebody who would ordinarily find within themselves and have no compunction about declaring the order to be illegal if it was, and remove them and replace them with a Trump loyalist who will just do whatever Trump needs done and find whatever findings of fact Trump needs there to be in order to hold people under his thumb, well, that would be difficult to deal with and polluting of the otherwise professional and non-political military. Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Man, there's a lot to tell you. But let's get back to Frank Kendall's piece under the provocative headline here, America has a rogue president, noting the firing of the various service chiefs and the top judge advocates general, and just beginning to explain the danger underlying all of it. He says, let us start with the senior officers. As Secretary of the Air Force himself, in the Biden administration, he says, I worked closely with General Charles Q. Brown, Jr. He's frequently referred to as CQ Brown, and not stand for Congressional Quarterly. I don't know what the Q is, but Charles Q. Brown, Jr., he worked closely with him for 2 years when he was Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and for more than a year when he was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In my entire 55 years of working in national security in many capacities, I have never known a steadier, wiser, and more professional, patriotic, or honorable officer than CQ Brown. General James Slife, is it S-L-I-F-E, Slife? I don't know. You tell me. Someone else who may know. And Admiral Lisa Franchetti are also extremely capable and professional officers whom I know well and deeply admire. They served for decades with honor and distinction over many administrations. It pains me to see these fine people being treated so unfairly, and for the first time in my career, to see dedicated apolitical military professionals being removed without cause. I am worried about political loyalty in general, becoming a criterion to hold high military positions. For now, I have confidence that our professional military has nurtured dozens of highly qualified senior officers capable of holding positions of trust and responsibility, people who can provide leadership at the Pentagon and offer sound military advice to our civilian leaders. But that optimism doesn't extend to the consequences of removing the military's top judge advocates general. the senior military professionals who interpret and enforce the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, they usually say for short, the rules that guide troops in the field. They have the independent legal authority to tell any military commander or political appointee that an order from the President or the Secretary of Defense is unlawful, cannot be given, or should not be obeyed. Of the 3 JAGs who were dismissed, that's Judge Advocates General, JAGs, I know Lieutenant General Charles Plummer and worked with him for more than 3 years. His legal advice was always sound, professional, and well supported. It is hard to imagine there was any reason to remove him other than the obvious one of replacing him with someone more loyal to Mr. Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and therefore more willing to interpret the law consistent with their desires. If there is one characteristic of this president and this administration, it is the utter lack of respect. Well, there is one characteristic. Maybe it's one characteristic that is most important. I don't know. It's a little failure in the writing here. But if there's one characteristic of this president and this administration, comma, it is the utter lack of respect for legal constraints and syntax. Mr. Trump has been clear about his views. Among many examples, he recently wrote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law." It is clear from Mr. Hegseth's confirmation hearing, public appearances, writings, and support for convicted war criminals that he also does not believe JAG officers should constrain war fighters or presumably the President and Secretary of Defense. Mr. Trump and Mr. Hegseth will now get to choose the JAG leadership for all 3 military departments. One has to ask why JAG leadership was singled out for replacement. This is part of a much larger pattern of disrespect, even disdain, for the rule of law. We do not need JAG leaders who fit this pattern. One of the most admirable characteristics of the American military is that all serving members are trained to understand that America stands for more than naked self-interest. Above all, it stands for the Constitution and the rule of law, including the laws of armed conflict and those that restrict the use of the military against American citizens. Undermining those core principles is a disservice to our men and women in uniform and to everything America has stood for throughout my life. We are in danger when the legal constraints on how the president uses the military, including within the United States, are ignored or brushed aside. My experiences with our JAG officers have always been positive. One stands out in particular. Years ago, I was an observer for the nonprofit organization Human Rights First at a legal proceeding for a detainee held at the military facility at Guantanamo Bay, where we're now allegedly shipping deportees, although that may also be a stunt as well. I'm not even sure it's happening. Anyway, in a briefing to observers and the media, the lead JAG defense attorney made a statement to the following effect. Whoever set up this prosecution system assumed that there would be quick trials with no meaningful defense by the assigned JAG officers. Those people did not understand JAG lawyers. We will support the rule of law and defend our clients, whomever they are. I have never been prouder to be an American than I was in that moment. We will see if the new JAG leadership lives up to this standard. Our country is in uncharted territory. We have an administration that is waging war against the rule of law. The evidence is everywhere. We don't yet know how far it will go as it seeks to control, reinterpret, rewrite, ignore, or defy legal constraints, including the Constitution itself. The replacement of the military JAG leadership is one skirmish in that war, but it's time for the American people across the political spectrum to recognize what's happening. America has a rogue president and a rogue administration, and we need to acknowledge that and respond. All right, a little bit of a vague ending, but, what are you going to recommend? It's a tough call, but a good call to action, certainly. And, man, like I said, there's so many other things going on. It's very difficult to know where to go next. We'll set up for Tuesday, which is very frequently back in the Joan McCarter days, and we hope to come back to Joan McCarter days once in a while when we can, but it's awfully early in the morning for her, I know. But we used to talk about, her congressional beat when she would come by, and we would count down the days to the next government shutdown, which we're back in under 3 weeks at this point. And that's coming up. And so it makes this article important. But also, by the way, I'll just point out this one came to my attention over Blue Sky thanks to Marcy Wheeler, who was discussing some important points that she found buried way down deep in the article, things that really jumped out at her. But the whole thing is important. And even the main idea, the main theme, as presented by the headline, is important. Congress ignores looming shutdown to focus on tax cuts and agency layoffs. And that's because they've begun the process of writing what they hope will become a fully fleshed out fiscal year 2026 budget. But I don't know, it's very, very odd. That, of course, that fiscal year begins on October 1st, 2025, October 1st of this year. And they've, in working that budget out, they've forgotten that there's no provision for funding the government from March, what are we at? March 14th, did we say? March 17th? I can't remember anymore. I think March 14th, right? March 14th through September 30th, we have no plan for funding the government. We're going to have another continuing resolution. Even if they settle on, and it looks like they're going to have incredible difficulty coming to a real agreement on a budget document. But even if they do that and they do it tomorrow, that's for next fiscal year. What are we doing for the rest of this fiscal year? Everybody's ignoring that, including the people in Congress, which is kind of troubling. I figured that Donald Trump would be ignoring it because he doesn't know that has to be done. And if you tell him, he won't care. And that was part of what Marcy found fascinating about the article, what Donald Trump is actually spending his time on rather than, finding a way to fund the government from March 14th onward. Congress ignores looming shutdown to focus on tax cuts and agency layoffs. Trump and Republican congressional leaders could fumble their way into a prolonged and painful shutdown of the federal government as March 14th deadline looms. They're currently in the middle of a battle of trying to game out in PR moves who, that is to say, which party will receive blame for the shutdown. Now, the true answer to any of this is that the majority party receives blame for a shutdown because they need to, they're the ones responsible with coming up for the votes and governing, but nobody knows how to govern anymore. And worse than that, I think, as we've mentioned on the show before, even if we didn't get to read the article, I think we made mention of the article that pointed out that the vast majority of the Republican membership of Congress has only served in the Trump era. Even if they, served during a Biden administration, that was still sort of a Trump era. The quality of politics had been forever diminished from the campaign of 2016 all the way through the campaign of 2020. And we were sort of stuck in Trump era politics. And now, of course, it's returned. And but now it's been going on, like we said, going on 10 plus years of this kind of politics. The vast majority of the Republican Party thinks this is normal and also thinks there's really no job for anybody in Congress but to stand there and be a camera hogging jerk. They don't understand that you're supposed to have policy ideas. And so they won't. And on March 14th, they're going to shut things down because they will fail to get the votes together to do something. But they'll say, well, somehow it's the Democrats' fault, the minority. We were supposed to, they were supposed to cross the aisle and vote with us, even though everything in a budget goes against their principles. Why didn't they join us? But we don't need to join you. You have the majority. Just use your majority, hold your votes together, and you can have what you want on the budget. You can't filibuster the budget. But they're going to, they're hoping to try to find a way to blame it on Democrats. Nonetheless, they told people what was in this budget, and then they were against it, and then they threatened us, and we lost 3 votes in the House from our Republicans, and we can't pass it. It's their fault for telling on us, is their basic approach. Anyway, none of this concerns Donald Trump for some reason. Paul Kane wrote this piece for the Washington Post with President Donald Trump and GOP leaders distracted by other issues. What issues? Congress is on the verge of bungling its way into a shutdown of federal agencies in less than 3 weeks, which I guess also we should say, I'm not certain that bothers them, given that the thing they've been focusing on is shutting down those agencies anyway, cutting off their funding, firing all the people. So a lack of actual funding probably won't disturb them a great deal. That's the worry. Trump and his advisors, particularly Elon Musk, have devoted the first month in office to trying to rip apart federal agencies that they don't like, while also upending traditional foreign policy alliances. Senate Majority Leader John Thune and House Speaker Mike Johnson have battled over how fast to move all of Trump's agenda, including at least $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, at a time when the national debt is ballooning. But those issues are likely to take months to fully negotiate and navigate through complex procedures. The most pressing problem, keeping the government open past the March 14th deadline, has been virtually ignored by top leaders. And unlike the most recent shutdown deadlines, the politics of the moment are not aligned to bring the two parties together with an obvious last-minute deal that simply adds more money for each side's favored projects. Instead, many Democrats have grown so livid about Trump and Musk's dismantling of agencies such as USAID, ignoring laws approved by Congress and signed by previous presidents, that many Democrats say they will oppose a new round of government funding without guarantees that Trump and Musk will abide by these laws. In outlining what they're seeking, Senator Patty Murray of Washington, the top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee, summed it up on Thursday. Simply an assurance that if there's going to be Democratic votes, that the president and Elon Musk will follow the law and they won't just take our bill that we worked really hard on and rip it up. I mean, that's a serious concern now, right? Well, what if the Republicans, realizing that they don't want to force another shutdown, come across the aisle and say, I'll tell you what, we'll give you money for some of the things that you want, enough to entice a couple of your votes, even. Well, Democrats are being reminded in the caucus meetings, if you agree with Republicans and make a deal, this president can just say, I don't care what the deal is, and only approve of the spending of money that Republicans like. And the thing that was granted to you as a deal maker to grease the skids so you would provide enough votes so that the bill could get passed, the budget could get passed, he'll just take that out. Oh, so there's really no reason for you to think you have a deal. If that money isn't spent in front of you, you have no deal. Don't be fooled. Now, back to the article. Republicans know that without any Democratic votes, the government will shut down. To boot, at least half a dozen anti-government conservatives in the House, sometimes several dozen, refuse to vote for even the most basic bill funding the government. And that's a problem when you have anti-government people in government. That's going to be an issue. Johnson's historically narrow majority, in other words, by the way, how come we never just call them anarchists? You're an anti-government member of the government? Oh, no, we're not anti that kind of government. We're just anti anything in the government that liberals might like. No, if it's passed as a law and you don't think you need to enforce it, you're anti-government. You're an anarchist. We can tell you so. Johnson's historically narrow majority affords him just one defection to pass something with only Republican votes. And by the way, they're still holding on to Elise Stefanik. She's not reporting for duty over at the UN anytime soon. Not that they believed in the UN anyway, but she's sticking around in the House because their majority is so narrow. They actually need her here more than at the UN. Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. It is their responsibility to find the votes to pass the final measures, said Representative Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, the ranking minority party member of the House Appropriations Committee. DeLauro labeled Musk an unchecked billionaire, which he is, whose actions have turned this negotiation from a relatively easy one to not normal times with a high degree of risk. Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who spent 28 years climbing the appropriations ladder to finally secure the chair's gavel last month, summed up the dire state of play. I'm not the chair. It's basically what she says. I believe we're at an impasse. We've made good We've made 4 good faith offers, Collins told reporters at the Capitol, adding that the Democrats have not made a real counteroffer. We've received only a perfunctory response. But what response do you hope to get when there's no law anymore? The divide is epitomized by a pair of collegial committee members who usually forge deals but instead are now casting blame. Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota noted that there is general agreement on funding levels that mirror a deal worked out in 2023. Republicans were willing to divvy up agency funds at those levels, even though the leaders who negotiated that pact, Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy, are no longer in office. Remember, so the Republican claim here is, we'll give you the same deal for a continuing resolution anyway, not the budget going forward for fiscal year 2026, but for the balance of 2025. What about we just do a clean CR? Whatever money agencies were getting on March 13th, they'll continue to get on the 14th, 15th, 16th, and all the way through September. Would that be acceptable to you? And they have a reason to expect, I guess, that a rational Democratic response to that would be okay, because we agreed to it before. But there's this new wrinkle. If we say okay and you say okay, what are you going to do if Donald Trump and Elon Musk say not okay? Are you going to stand up to them and force it to be okay or not? Because if the answer is no, you can't have our votes. You're not really asking us to agree to the same deal. You're asking us to agree to the deal, but also agree to Donald Trump's unilateral veto over the idea, and a line item veto at that. You're not going to stop him. We're not going to help you. It's not us helping you. It's us helping ourselves. It's us helping the country. We don't believe that he's going to obey the law we pass. Are you going to help make sure that he does? If not, we won't help you. If the Democrats but now they say, well, if you're not going to help us, then we're going to blame the shutdown on you. Well, no, you can still pass this thing all by yourself. The reason you need any Democrats at all is you can't control your anarchists. You're a part anarchist party, and that's a problem because anarchists can't and won't and don't want to govern. That's on you. But no, Mike Rounds says if the Democrats want to do a shutdown, they can simply do it by refusing to move forward. No, if you have the majority in both houses and you can control it, their refusal to move forward means nothing. But he's just glossing that over so that he can blame Democrats. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware grew livid at the suggestion that Democrats are blocking a deal. Look, the Trump administration is already shutting the government down, Coons said, and he's right about that, even if he has to go to dinner. In recent years, he oversaw funding dedicated to USAID and other foreign aid programs, Coons said, so he knows. It has specific and concrete language that says you cannot restructure USAID without congressional approval. They just did it. They just did it. So this is not hypothetical. It is not hyperbole. It is a completely understandable concern. The Democrats are demanding an agreement written into the package to require Trump to abide by these spending bill outlines. I don't really know how that would ever work, but that's what they're asking for. That is the sort of thing that resides above the pay grade of the House and Senate Appropriations Committee leaders. Those types of riders, as they are known by insiders, require negotiations among Thune, Johnson, and their Democratic counterparts, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, as well as the administration. But Trump is not paying close attention to insider machinations on Capitol Hill, and even if he was, he wouldn't be agreeing to them. Johnson and Thune's spat has gone on for almost 3 months now over 1 or 2 bills using the fast-track route to pass legislation on party line votes. They're talking about reconciliation bills. Each time Trump has seemed to force a path, like his social media posts Wednesday morning supporting Johnson's one big, beautiful bill. He contradicts the decision soon after. Parenthetically, it says early Wednesday afternoon, Vice President J.D. Vance met with GOP senators and gave them the green light to continue their 2-bill approach. Trump has spent, though, this is what Marcy found so fascinating, Trump has spent more of his personal time trying to negotiate a truce to professional golf's civil war. Did you even know there was one? including a 3-hour meeting in the Oval Office on Thursday that included Tiger Woods. We noted that Tiger Woods was there the other day during one of the weird press conferences. Didn't know why. This is why. But he spent more time trying to settle this pro-golf civil war than he has dedicated to trying to hammer out a deal to keep the government funded. Apparently, he wants to merge his Saudi Arabia-backed live golf, with, remember they were a splinter faction and they started their own pro-golf tour. Well, it's lasted all of, 2 years, 3 years. Now they want to merge it with the PGA. And he's trying to facilitate this merger rather than keep the government running, because that's what this idiot is about. I like golf, not government. Thune devoted the last week to the Senate passage of a budget resolution that is the first step on the way toward increased border and defense spending. If successful that way, Thune would come back later in the year to pass another GOP-only bill, including tax cuts. Not much in the way of helpful explanation of procedure here, but it's fairly accurate anyway. Johnson is aiming in the coming weeks to pass the House's budget resolution, trying to wrap all of the GOP's priorities into one massive bill. Even if he succeeds, Johnson's plan would then instruct committees to spend a few months pulling together all the legislation before returning to the House floor to consider the massive package. None of those actions would do anything to avert the shutdown iceberg that is dead ahead. Again, they just say so, but in case you're wondering again why that is, I think we've made it pretty clear. The one reconciliation bill or two reconciliation bill approach doesn't really matter. The budget that they're working on is for fiscal year 2026. There are still, what are we in, March? So 6 months left of fiscal year 2025 for which there's no provision whatsoever. And on March 14th, we're closed until September 30th unless they come up with something, and no one has even tried to come up with anything. That's pretty big. All of this could have been handled in December at the end of Biden's presidency, as the appropriators had a rough spending outline ready to divide up more than $1.7 trillion in agency budgets. But Johnson, fearing a revolt from the far-right flank, ordered up a punt on the funding bills until March 14th so that he could secure enough votes on January 3rd for another term as Speaker. So, in other words, the anarchist wing of the Republican Party traded a shutdown crisis. If you will allow us to shut down the government in March, we'll keep you as Speaker. That's why we have this. They could have cut a deal before anyone knew that Trump would be impounding funds, although I guess they hinted that they were going to do that all along. No one paid any attention to it. They probably could have gotten a CR that went all the way to the end of the fiscal year in December, but opted not to do so because doing so would have cost Johnson the power of the speakership. Murray, who are we talking about? Oh, Patty Murray, has not been shy about sending out warning flares that a real deadline is fast approaching. I've been counting it down for a long time, really, since they struck that CR deal that takes them to March 14th. I just said, start the countdown clock right now to the next shutdown. There's no plan for what to do on March 15th or for March 15th. I would urge my Republican colleagues to get serious and keep your eye on the ball regarding the funding lapse on March 14th, Murray said during a February 12th Senate Budget Committee hearing on Thune's budget proposal. Some congressional insiders fear that a prolonged shutdown is something that Musk and the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, whose roots come from working for the most far-right House Republicans, the anarchists, would cheer on. Musk, an unelected advisor with vast power, maybe, has so far not worried about the consequences of mass firings of workers in charge of air safety and those administering crucial foreign aid abroad and other things, like facilitating organ donor networks, etc., as we learned over the weekend from ProPublica. Don't have time for that one today. And this shutdown would be much more painful, could be much more painful than the nearly 5-week version during Trump's first term that started in late 2018. That shutdown partially shuttered some federal agencies, although critical entities such as the Pentagon already had their annual budgets approved and remained open. This year, mid-March shutdown would leave every agency without funding, keeping only those employees deemed essential at their posts. Even those key federal workers still at their jobs, such as Border Patrol agents and military troops stationed abroad, would be working without pay. Collins, who voted to convict Trump in the 2021 impeachment trial, indicated she opposes the Democratic bid to write binding language into the spending bills. Why would you do that? When bills like this are done, the rule in the past has been no poison pills, no new riders, she told reporters. That's pretty interesting, especially given that the rider would be this law has to be followed. This blueprint is for real. No, you can't have that. Traditionally, there are no riders, true, but traditionally you never have to say this is the law and we're going to stick to it. Coons doesn't even know how Democrats would write such a guarantee into legislation, given that it is already the law. I mean, it is demonstrably the law that when we pass appropriations bills and the president signs it into law, it has the force of law, he said, and you're supposed to follow it. That's true. They could write a whole other article about that, and probably should write a whole other article about that. It's not even clear that putting this in, if Democrats demanded that as the price of going along with this, and they would only have to go along with it because Republicans were refusing to do so because they're anarchists. But even if you got that and you got that guarantee written into the law, if you can ignore the parts of the law that you don't like, why not ignore that part? It's not, in other words, it doesn't have any force as a guarantee anyway, so don't even bother to negotiate for it. That would be my advice to you. I'm sorry, but that probably means the government is shutting down in less than 3 weeks. All right, lots of other things we could have gotten to, but didn't have time for. Luckily, we have the whole balance of the week ahead of us, and we should just march forward afterwards with that. One of the things I guess I wanted to get on the record, something we'll try and discuss later that we hinted at earlier, most Republican members of Congress don't even see finding a way out of this impasse as part of their job. Their job, like Nancy Mace, is to get in front of the camera.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, more news coming, of course, with Justice Putnam with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. What's up top for him? Trump is losing it as Americans of all parties quickly turn against him. Rest of the menu includes all, of course, the worthy news from around the country and around the world as usual. We'll be back tomorrow for more.